The calm before the storm. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before them. Captain Marcus Carter stood in front of the large window in the Sovereign's bridge, staring out into the silent abyss. It was a rare moment of stillness, one he would never take for granted. The hum of the ship's engines, the soft beeping of the consoles, the sound of his crew working. Everything was normal, quiet, peaceful. But Carter knew this calm wouldn't last long. Behind him, the crew moved with practiced ease. Lieutenant Vega stood at the tactical console, her eyes scanning the holographic displays. The rest of the crew was focused, their faces serious, but there was an underlying tension in the air. This silence wasn't a sign of peace, it was the calm before the storm. Everyone aboard the Sovereign knew it. "We've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Captain," Vega said without looking up from her station. "The alien forces are closing in on our colonies. We can only hold them off for so long." Carter nodded but said nothing. He had been in countless battles, but something about this one felt different. It wasn't just the threat of invasion. It was the fact that humanity had been preparing for this moment for centuries. The fleet they had at their disposal was something the galaxy had long forgotten. Ancient ships, hidden in secret locations across the universe, were now ready for action. Humanity's greatest secret was about to be revealed. For centuries, humanity had been underestimated by the rest of the galaxy. They were seen as weak, primitive. But what no one knew was that humanity had been quietly building its strength, waiting for the day when they would need to fight back. This was that day. "Commander Zhang, how long until we reach the rendezvous point?" Carter asked, his voice steady but sharp. Zhang, the ship's communications officer, glanced at her console. "We're 10 minutes out, Captain. All systems are ready. The fleet is in position." "Good," Carter replied, his jaw tightening. "Stay alert. This will be our first real test. We have no idea what we're up against." The truth was, the humans were outnumbered. The enemy fleet, a powerful alliance of alien races, had already crushed several of Earth's outer colonies. They were ruthless and well-coordinated. For most of the galaxy, Earth was just another weak, distant planet to conquer. But they had no idea what was waiting for them. Carter turned back to the window. His eyes narrowed as he thought of the devastation the enemy had already caused. The reports from the outer colonies had been grim. Cities reduced to rubble, populations wiped out. The humans who had survived were forced to retreat to their final strongholds. The enemy had underestimated them at every turn, but this time would be different. "All systems are online," Lieutenant Vega reported. "The fleet is ready to engage on your command, Captain." Carter nodded, his eyes still focused on the stars. The fleet would arrive soon, and when it did, nothing would be the same. The enemy would learn the hard way that humanity had a secret weapon, something they hadn't counted on. But there was one problem. The enemy didn't just want to defeat humanity. They wanted to crush it completely. The stakes were higher than ever. "I want everyone to stay sharp," Carter said. "We don't know what we'll be facing once we drop out of hyperspace. This is the calm before the storm. After today, things will never be the same." The crew fell silent, each of them knowing the gravity of the situation. They were about to fight for the survival of their home planet. They were about to reveal humanity's greatest secret, and the galaxy would never forget what happened next. As the countdown to the rendezvous point began, Carter felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was the knowledge that the battle ahead would change everything. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for humanity's future, a fight to show the galaxy that Earth would not be so easily defeated. The ship's engines hummed louder, and the stars outside began to shift as they dropped out of hyperspace. The silence was broken. "All hands, prepare for battle," Carter said, his voice firm. In the cold expanse of space, the Sovereign and its fleet emerged from the shadows, ready to face the enemy. Humanity had waited centuries for this moment, and now the time had come. No longer would they be underestimated. No longer would they be the weaklings of the galaxy. The storm was coming, and humanity would be at the center of it. As Carter stared out at the distant enemy ships, he knew that the battle ahead would be fierce, but it would be their victory. The Sovereign's fleet was ready to fight, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy its true power. The fleet unleashed. The tension in the bridge was palpable. Captain Marcus Carter stood, his hands gripping the back of the command chair as he looked at the screens before him. The fleet was in position, ready for battle. But the sight on the view screen made his heart race. What they had initially thought was a single enemy fleet was nothing more than a distraction. The real threat had arrived. Lieutenant Vega's voice cut through the tense silence. "Captain, our sensors are picking up multiple enemy ships. They've surrounded us. This isn't a mere skirmish. It's a full-scale ambush." Carter didn't respond right away. His mind raced, calculating the odds. The human fleet had been preparing for years, but they hadn't anticipated such a massive enemy force. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the weight of that realization settled over him like a heavy cloud. Yet in his gut, something told him this wasn't the end. Humanity had one last card to play, one secret weapon no one, not even the enemy, was prepared for. "Prepare the fleet," Carter finally said, his voice steady despite the growing pressure. "Let them think we're cornered. We'll give them everything they expect." "Captain." Vega looked at him, surprised by the calmness in his voice. "What do you mean?" Carter didn't take his eyes off the screen as he spoke. "We've spent decades preparing for this moment. The enemy's arrogance will be their downfall. They think we're weak. They think they've won. But we've been hiding something they never expected." The crew exchanged confused glances, unsure of what he meant. But Carter didn't need to explain. He knew the time had come to reveal the full might of humanity's hidden fleet, the very fleet that had been lying dormant, ready to awaken at a moment's notice. "Commander Zhang," Carter called out, his tone commanding. "Activate the hidden fleet." Zhang's eyes widened, and for a brief second, the room fell into stunned silence. The Sovereign was not the only ship in the fleet. Deep within the galaxy, hidden from the eyes of every enemy and ally alike, were dozens of ships, ancient, powerful, and far more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was humanity's greatest secret, one kept so well that even their closest allies had no idea of its existence. And now it was time to unleash it. "Yes, Captain," Zhang responded, her voice steady despite the shock. She began typing quickly into her console, sending the signal to activate the ships in secret locations across the galaxy. The bridge of the Sovereign filled with the sounds of systems coming online. The hum of the ship's engines seemed to change pitch, and Carter felt a surge of anticipation as he watched the holographic display shift. Hundreds of new ships were now appearing on the radar, each one a relic from humanity's forgotten past. These were no ordinary ships. They were advanced beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. As the hidden fleet activated, Carter's eyes flickered to the main view screen. Enemy ships had already moved into position, locking in on their target. They were ready to strike. Yet they had no idea what was coming. "Enemy fleet is closing in," Captain Vega reported, her voice tense. "They'll be in weapons range in less than a minute." The enemy had already begun charging their weapons, preparing to obliterate the human fleet. But as Carter watched the scene unfold, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The moment had arrived. Humanity was no longer the prey. It was time to become the predator. "All ships, open fire," Carter commanded. The words came easily, his voice full of authority. The tension of the moment was gone, replaced by the calm focus that came with knowing they held the upper hand. Immediately, the Sovereign's weapon systems came online, and massive energy beams shot out toward the enemy fleet. The hidden ships, now revealed, unleashed a barrage of firepower so intense that it lit up the dark expanse of space. The enemy ships, momentarily stunned by the sudden onslaught, began to retaliate. But the human fleet had the element of surprise, and they used it to devastating effect. In a matter of seconds, the tide of the battle shifted. Enemy ships that had once seemed unstoppable were now crumbling under the force of humanity's attack. Massive explosions lit up the battlefield as human ships moved in, their weapons devastatingly precise. Each shot was like a hammer blow, shattering the enemy's formations and sending debris flying in every direction. The enemy's superior numbers no longer mattered. They had never anticipated this. They had never expected humanity to have such a powerful fleet, much less the skill to wield it with such precision. It was as if the enemy were fighting a war on two fronts, one with their fleet, and one with a force they never knew existed. "Captain, they're retreating," Vega exclaimed, disbelief in her voice. "They can't withstand the firepower. The enemy is pulling back." Carter stood silently for a moment, watching as the enemy ships began to break formation, fleeing from the battle as fast as they could. The human fleet had taken the upper hand. But as he watched the enemy retreat, Carter knew this was just the beginning. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. "Don't let them get away," Carter ordered. "Finish what we started." The true enemy revealed. The victorious feeling aboard the human fleet was short-lived. The enemy was retreating, but the scanners began to light up again with an alarming signal, something unlike anything Captain Carter and his crew had ever encountered. It wasn't one ship. It wasn't a fleet. It was something far worse. The gigantic object on the radar didn't match any known design in the galaxy, even among the most advanced ships of the human fleet. "Captain, we've just picked up an enormous ship on the outskirts of the battlefield. It's unlike anything we've seen before," reported Lieutenant Vega, her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and unease. Carter's mind raced. He had thought that the worst was over, but now something far more dangerous was on its way. "Can you identify it, Lieutenant?" Carter asked, his voice steady, but his heart pounding. Vega studied the readings, shaking her head. "No, Captain. The technology is completely unknown to us. It's massive. The size is beyond anything we've ever seen. It's advancing towards us, and it's getting closer by the second." The crew exchanged nervous glances as the unknown ship appeared on the view screen, growing larger and larger with each passing moment. It was massive. Unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed, it was sleek, yet menacing, with a dark surface that seemed to absorb the light around it. The ship's design was alien in every sense of the word, and it was far beyond what any of the human fleets could have dreamed up, even with all their hidden technology. "That's not just a ship," Carter muttered under his breath. "That's a warship." It became evident very quickly that this wasn't just any enemy retreating. The true power of their adversary was just revealing itself, and it was like a force of nature. The ship moved toward them at an unrelenting pace, its massive size dwarfing the human fleet in comparison. There was no way to prepare for this, no contingency plan, and they had no idea what kind of firepower it could unleash. "Captain, the enemy warship is locking onto our fleet's position," Vega warned, her voice strained. "They're readying their weapons. This could be it." Carter stood, gripping the arm of his chair tightly, his mind spinning through every possible strategy. The odds had just shifted again. For the first time in his life, Carter had no idea how they would win this fight. They had the upper hand with their hidden fleet, but it was now clear that this alien warship was something completely different. It had to be the heart of the enemy's power, a weapon so dangerous that it had been kept hidden until now. The human fleet was in no position to face such a threat. Even with all their technology, they would be overwhelmed in seconds. Carter wasn't about to let that happen. "We can't let them intimidate us," he said, his voice firm. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. We'll make sure we don't give them a direct shot. Get our best pilots on it. If we can't fight them head-on, we'll at least make them earn their victory." "Sir," Commander Zhang interjected, "we're not sure how long our evasive maneuvers will keep us safe. That warship looks like it can match any of our best ships, and its weapons systems are off the charts." "We don't have a choice," Carter said, his voice carrying authority. Make sure the fleet stays tight. We need to confuse their targeting systems. Prepare for an all-out assault if we have to. The crew sprang into action, shifting from a victory mentality to a defensive one. The fleet scattered, breaking formation and sending out smaller attack craft that flew around the larger warship like gnats trying to distract a hungry predator. But the looming ship didn't flinch. It continued its slow, methodical approach, as though its size alone was enough to crush everything in its path. We need to find its weak spot. Fast, Carter muttered, his mind racing. But just as he was about to order a detailed scan of the warship's hull, a loud beep sounded from one of the control panels. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega shouted, her eyes wide. "Incoming fire. The warship's weapons are charging. It's targeting us." The room fell into dead silence for a moment. Carter's breath caught in his chest as the warship's weapons began to glow an eerie blue, charging up with unimaginable power. There was no time to wait for another round of evasive maneuvers. The warship was about to fire, and its firepower would be more than enough to wipe the human fleet off the map. "Brace for impact," Carter shouted. And then it happened. The first shot from the enemy warship hit the fleet with the force of 1,000 suns. The explosion was deafening as the blast tore through the front lines of the human ships, sending debris flying into space. The shockwaves reverberated through the entire battlefield as the human fleet began to fall apart under the sheer force of the attack. "Captain, we've lost 2 ships," Vega called out. "They're falling apart under the blast. The enemy's firepower is too much." Carter's mind raced as he watched the devastation unfold before him. The human fleet wasn't built to withstand this kind of force. They had always relied on speed and surprise, on their hidden ships and secret weapons. But now, they were facing something that defied everything they knew about warfare. "We can't lose," Carter said, his voice shaking. He didn't know what to do next, but he couldn't let his people die like this. They had fought so hard to get here. The human fleet had a chance to defeat this enemy, but it had to be done in the right way. He turned to Vega. "Prepare all ships for a counterattack. It's time to show the enemy what humanity can really do." The unexpected reinforcements. The chaos of the battle continued to unfold, but amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope sparked in the most unexpected way. As Captain Carter ordered his fleet to regroup and prepare for a counterattack, a new signal flashed onto the screens. This signal was different. It wasn't the usual kind of communication from Allied ships or enemy forces. It wasn't an emergency distress call or a standard fleet identification. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega called out, her voice trembling. "We've got another fleet entering the system, but it's not showing up on our identification systems. We don't know who they are." The tension in the room grew palpable. After the overwhelming firepower of the enemy warship, the last thing they needed was more unknowns. The last thing they needed was another surprise. Carter's pulse quickened as he stared at the screen. The fleet approaching them wasn't human. That much was clear. Its signature was completely different from anything in the human database. There was nothing familiar about it. "We can't let them intimidate us," he said, his voice firm. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. We'll make sure we don't give them a direct shot. Get our best pilots on it. If we can't fight them head-on, we'll at least make them earn their victory." "Sir," Commander Zhang interjected, "we're not sure how long our evasive maneuvers will keep us safe. That warship looks like it can match any of our best ships, and its weapons systems are off the charts." "We don't have a choice," Carter said, his voice carrying authority. "Make sure the fleet stays tight. We need to confuse their targeting systems. Prepare for an all-out assault if we have to." The crew sprang into action, shifting from a victory mentality to a defensive one. The fleet scattered, breaking formation and sending out smaller attack craft that flew around the larger warship like gnats trying to distract a hungry predator. But the looming ship didn't flinch. It continued its slow, methodical approach, as though its size alone was enough to crush everything in its path. "We need to find its weak spot." Fast, Carter muttered, his mind racing. But just as he was about to order a detailed scan of the warship's hull, a loud beep sounded from one of the control panels. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega shouted, her eyes wide. "Incoming fire. The warship's weapons are charging. It's targeting us." The room fell into dead silence for a moment. Carter's breath caught in his chest as the warship's weapons began to glow an eerie blue, charging up with unimaginable power. There was no time to wait for another round of evasive maneuvers. The warship was about to fire, and its firepower would be more than enough to wipe the human fleet off the map. "Brace for impact," Carter shouted. And then it happened. The first shot from the enemy warship hit the fleet with the force of 1,000 suns. The explosion was deafening as the blast tore through the front lines of the human ships, sending debris flying into space. The shockwaves reverberated through the entire battlefield as the human fleet began to fall apart under the sheer force of the attack. "Captain, we've lost 2 ships," Vega called out. "They're falling apart under the blast. The enemy's firepower is too much." Carter's mind raced as he watched the devastation unfold before him. The human fleet wasn't built to withstand this kind of force. They had always relied on speed and surprise, on their hidden ships and secret weapons. But now, they were facing something that defied everything they knew about warfare. "We can't lose," Carter said, his voice shaking. He didn't know what to do next, but he couldn't let his people die like this. They had fought so hard to get here. The human fleet had a chance to defeat this enemy, but it had to be done in the right way. He turned to Vega. "Prepare all ships for a counterattack. It's time to show the enemy what humanity can really do." The unexpected reinforcements. The chaos of the battle continued to unfold, but amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope sparked in the most unexpected way. As Captain Carter ordered his fleet to regroup and prepare for a counterattack, a new signal flashed onto the screens. This signal was different. It wasn't the usual kind of communication from Allied ships or enemy forces. It wasn't an emergency distress call or a standard fleet identification. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega called out, her voice trembling. "We've got another fleet entering the system, but it's not showing up on our identification systems. We don't know who they are." The tension in the room grew palpable. After the overwhelming firepower of the enemy warship, the last thing they needed was more unknowns. The last thing they needed was another surprise. Carter's pulse quickened as he stared at the screen. The fleet approaching them wasn't human. That much was clear. Its signature was completely different from anything in the human database. There was nothing familiar about it. The clash of titans. The hum of energy in the atmosphere was palpable. As the human fleet braced for the enemy's attack, Carter's heart raced. The mysterious fleet, which had arrived out of nowhere, had suddenly become humanity's only hope. Yet there was no time to ponder how they had found them or who they were. The enemy warship, now fully charged, aimed its weapons toward the human fleet once more. A massive surge of power shot out from its cannons, tearing through the void like a thunderbolt. The beam of energy grew brighter and more intense as it moved toward them. "Brace for impact," Carter shouted, his voice filled with authority. The crew scrambled to engage their shields, but it was clear that the enemy's firepower was beyond anything they had faced before. The hull of one of the human ships shuddered as the beam made contact, a shockwave rippling across the battlefield. Explosions erupted in all directions. Several ships in the human fleet were instantly disabled, their systems fried by the sheer force of the blast. The battlefield became chaotic. Ships rocked back and forth as they attempted to regroup, but the enemy's overwhelming firepower seemed unstoppable. Carter's eyes darted across the screens. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. "We need those reinforcements now," he muttered under his breath, his grip tightening around the armrests of his chair. But just as the situation seemed dire, the unknown fleet finally made its move. Without warning, the mysterious fleet's ships broke formation, weaving through the debris of destroyed ships with surprising agility. They moved as if they knew exactly where to strike, their advanced weapons locking onto the enemy warship with precision. Suddenly, a barrage of energy blasts, unlike anything seen before, erupted from the unknown fleet. The alien ships fired small, concentrated beams that hit the enemy warship's shields. The shields flickered and cracked under the pressure, a noticeable ripple running across the massive surface of the warship. Carter's eyes widened. For the first time since the battle began, the enemy warship seemed vulnerable. Its shields had been breached, and it was now exposed. The energy blasts continued, each one chipping away at the warship's defenses, forcing it to reel back. "Hold your fire," Carter commanded. "Let them finish the job." The human fleet, stunned but reinvigorated by the sight of the enemy warship losing ground, watched as the unknown fleet closed in, its ships darting around the enemy with lightning speed. The battle had shifted. The mysterious fleet seemed to know exactly how to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. However, the enemy warship wasn't going to give up that easily. Its weapons fired back with vicious intensity, a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. The energy blasts tore through the remaining human ships, but the unknown fleet was ready. They danced around the enemy's attacks, their movements coordinated and precise. One by one, the alien ships launched missiles that pierced the enemy warship's remaining defenses. The warship's hull began to crack and splinter under the barrage. "Captain," Lieutenant Vega shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "The enemy warship is losing power. It's on the verge of collapse." Carter watched in disbelief as the massive warship, the one that had decimated humanity's forces, began to falter. It was being brought to its knees by the mysterious fleet's relentless assault. But just when it seemed like the warship was about to be destroyed, the impossible happened. A massive explosion erupted from within the warship. The ship's core had detonated, sending out a shockwave that rippled across the battlefield, knocking several of the unknown fleet's ships off course. For a moment, everything went silent. The remnants of the warship floated in space, debris scattered everywhere. Carter's breath caught in his throat. The battle had ended, but the cost was high. Many human ships had been lost, and the debris field stretched as far as the eye could see. "The enemy is defeated," Vega reported, still looking at her screen. "But we've lost too many ships. We need to regroup." Carter nodded grimly. "We've survived this battle, but we've lost a lot. Let's get our ships back into formation." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had never imagined that it would come down to this. The mysterious fleet had saved them, but at a cost. Now they were left with the question of who these new allies were and why they had appeared at the most critical moment. As the human fleet slowly regrouped, the unknown fleet moved in, their ships hovering above the debris. Their ships glowed with an eerie light, casting shadows across the wreckage. The moment of victory felt hollow. The alien fleet, who had turned the tide of the battle, had not come to celebrate. They had only come to win. Carter stood up from his command chair, his eyes focused on the fleet's ships as they hovered in place. There was still so much to learn, so much to understand about these unexpected allies. "Prepare a communication link," he ordered. "We need to speak with them." We had a lot of questions. Vega hesitated for a moment before complying. "Captain, are you sure? They could have their own agenda." "We don't have a choice," Carter replied. "They saved us. It's time we find out why." The silent arrival. The bridge of the human fleet was still, an eerie calm that followed the chaos of the battle. The victorious hum of the engines that had once powered the human ships into action had now quieted down. Carter stood at the command center, his gaze locked onto the view screen where the remnants of the destroyed enemy warship floated in the distance. But his mind wasn't on the destruction. It was on the silent fleet that had emerged from the shadows to tip the scales in humanity's favor. What were they after? Who were they? And most importantly, why had they chosen now to show themselves? "Captain, communication link established," Lieutenant Vega reported, her fingers flying across the console. "They are responding." Carter nodded, trying to push aside the confusion swirling in his mind. Put it on the screen. The view screen flickered for a moment before a strange symbol appeared, glowing in an iridescent blue. The colors rippled like water disturbed by a gentle breeze. Then, slowly, a figure appeared, its form hazy at first, but gradually becoming more defined. It was a humanoid figure, but unlike anything Carter had seen before. Tall and thin, with a smooth, almost translucent skin that seemed to shimmer with light, it stood as a beacon of alien intelligence. "Greetings, human commander." The figure's voice resonated through the speakers, both calm and otherworldly. "We are the Zorathi. We have been watching your species for millennia." Carter's stomach clenched as the name echoed in his mind. "The Zorathi," he whispered. The stories of an ancient alien race, rumored to have immense power, had been nothing more than myth. Until now. The Zorathi continued, its voice unwavering. "We are not your enemies. We never were. But we are not your allies either. We came here to observe, to study. You have proven yourself to be a species of great resilience and strength." Carter's mind raced. Observers. Study. It felt like they had just stumbled upon something far bigger than anyone had imagined. "Why now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. "Why intervene now, after all this time?" There was a pause, as though the Zorathi was carefully considering its words. "The time of your species' isolation is over," the figure said finally. "Your race has reached a critical juncture in your evolution, and we have decided that your survival is no longer something we can ignore." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Survival," he repeated. "You've been watching us all this time, and now you decide we matter." "You do," the Zorathi said simply. "But it is not just for your survival that we have intervened. The galaxy is on the brink of war, and you are a key player. The battles you will face, the challenges ahead, are beyond your current understanding. But we can offer you knowledge, technology, and guidance." The words hung in the air like a weight, heavy with implications. Carter exchanged glances with his officers, none of them fully understanding what to make of this encounter. It was clear that the Zorathi were not like any other species humanity had encountered. They weren't here for conquest or destruction, but their offer of guidance was equally unsettling. "Why would you help us?" Carter asked, a tinge of suspicion in his voice. "What do you want in return?" The Zorathi's features remained impassive, its voice as cool as ever. "We do not seek anything from you. We have already taken what we need, in knowledge. You have no obligation to us. However, we will help you because your survival is beneficial to the greater balance of the galaxy." Carter wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew one thing. The Zorathi had been watching humanity for a long time, and now they were offering to teach humanity the secrets of the universe. It could be a gift or a trap. "How do we know we can trust you?" Carter pressed, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His crew depended on him to make the right decision. The Zorathi seemed unfazed by the question, but Carter could feel the pressure in the room rise as the silence stretched between them. Finally, the Zorathi spoke again, its tone softening just a fraction. "Trust is earned," it said, "and you will have to decide for yourselves. Our actions will speak louder than our words." Carter exhaled slowly. It wasn't an answer, but it was all he had for now. He had a decision to make, and it wasn't one he could make alone. Humanity was teetering on the edge of something bigger than any one person could comprehend. The Zorathi had offered their assistance, but what would humanity do with that power? "Understood," Carter said, his voice firm. "We will consider your offer, but we need time to think." The Zorathi nodded, its form shimmering as if in acknowledgement. "You have your time, Commander. When you are ready, we will be waiting." The screen went dark, leaving Carter staring at the empty space where the alien figure had stood just moments before. The unknowns were vast. Was this a sign of hope, or was it the beginning of something darker? He turned toward his officers. The tension in the room was palpable, each of them aware that the decision ahead could change the future of humanity. "We'll need to be careful," Carter said, his voice low. "This isn't just a battle for survival anymore. We're playing on a galactic stage now, and we don't know the rules." The decision. The human fleet remained in orbit around the shattered enemy ship, its massive form now little more than a floating graveyard. The battle had been won, but the victory felt hollow. The reality of the Zorathi's presence weighed heavily on the minds of Carter and his crew. In the days following the mysterious encounter, discussions had been endless, the room divided over the next steps. Some saw the Zorathi as saviors, an ancient race offering guidance and technology that could lift humanity to new heights. Others saw them as a threat, an unknown force whose motives were still unclear, who may have their own hidden agenda. Carter had spent sleepless nights in his quarters, poring over the data gathered from the alien encounter. What were the Zorathi's true intentions? Why had they waited so long to reveal themselves? Was humanity simply a pawn in some grand galactic game, or were they genuinely offering help in exchange for nothing? He walked onto the bridge, determined to find answers. His officers were already gathered around, waiting for him to speak. Vega, the tactical officer, was the first to meet his gaze. Her expression was grim, yet expectant. "Sir, we've received no further communication from the Zorathi," Vega reported. "They haven't made any moves, and their fleet is still in orbit. If they had any intentions of striking, they would have done so already." Carter nodded. "And what do you think they want?" "I think they're testing us," she said. "They're waiting to see how we respond. They've given us a lot of power, knowledge, technology, without asking for anything in return. That's not something we can just ignore." Carter's thoughts were clouded. He had never been one to take risks. Every decision he made affected the lives of millions of people. But this was different. The galaxy had changed. The battle they had just fought was nothing compared to what awaited them. "Captain," said Lieutenant Drake, the communications officer, speaking up from the back of the room. "We've received an encrypted message from the Zorathi. It's marked as urgent." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Put it through." The view screen flickered, and the shimmering form of the Zorathi appeared once again. This time, the figure looked more serious, its usually calm expression tinged with something deeper. Concern, perhaps. "Commander Carter," the Zorathi's voice resonated across the bridge. "We are reaching out once more. We are aware of your hesitation, and we understand your caution. But time is running out." The urgency in its voice was unmistakable. Carter stepped forward, his mind racing. "What do you mean, time is running out?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "There are forces at play far beyond your understanding. Your species is about to enter a conflict unlike any you've ever faced. The enemy you fought today was only a small part of a larger threat. We are here to guide you, to help you survive the coming war," the Zorathi explained. The room fell silent as Carter absorbed the words. A new war. The threat of something even greater. The weight of the situation pressed on him. He knew the stakes were high, but he hadn't realized just how close the galaxy was to a full-scale conflict. "What kind of war are we talking about?" Carter asked, his voice strained. "And why didn't you warn us sooner?" "The war is not just between species, Commander. It is a battle for the future of the galaxy itself," the Zorathi replied, its form shimmering as if to emphasize the gravity of the situation. "We did not intervene earlier because you were not ready. But now you are." Carter took a deep breath. His mind was racing. The Zorathi's offer of assistance had seemed like a blessing at first, but now it felt like humanity was being thrust into the center of something far bigger than they could control. Were they prepared for this? "Why us?" Carter asked, narrowing his eyes. "Why are you choosing humanity to fight this war?" The Zorathi's form seemed to soften. "Because your species has something the others do not. A unique resilience. Your adaptability. Your ability to rise from the ashes, to fight against impossible odds. It is unlike any we have seen. We believe you are the key to turning the tide." Carter's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. He had to decide if humanity was ready to step into this galactic war, if they could shoulder the responsibility of defending the galaxy and their own survival. "We'll need time," Carter said finally, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions within him. "But we'll consider your offer. This is too big a decision to make hastily." The Zorathi paused, and for a moment, it seemed as though it was studying him. "You have time, Commander. But know this, the enemy is already moving. You will need to decide soon. The war has already begun." The communication link ended, and the Zorathi's form disappeared from the screen. The silence that followed was deafening. Carter turned to face his officers, all eyes on him. "What now, Captain?" Vega asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Carter felt the weight of their gaze. The future of humanity, the fate of the galaxy, it all rested on this decision. "We prepare," Carter said, his voice firm. "We've won this battle, but this is just the beginning. We need to be ready. We need to be smarter, stronger, and faster than anyone has ever been before." His officers nodded in agreement, a shared understanding passing between them. The road ahead would be difficult, but if humanity was going to survive the coming war, they had to fight with everything they had. And so, they began their preparations, knowing that the true battle, the battle for the galaxy's future, was about to begin.